A forgotten mansion on the hills of a distant town catches the attention of the mystery machine. With legends about the ghost of Count Sinclair, Scooby-Doo and Shaggy are terrified even before stepping inside, but Fred insists that there is something more behind the hauntings. Velma investigates, while Daphne finds herself in danger, and with that, everyone begins to wonder, is there a tormented spirit or someone trying to deceive them? What hides behind these dark walls? The night was silent, with only the rustling of dry leaves being blown by the wind. The full moon illuminated the distant hills, where the imposing Sinclair mansion stood, an old and abandoned building, long forgotten by everyone. In local legends, it was said to be cursed, haunted by the spirit of Count Sinclair, a nobleman who mysteriously disappeared decades ago. And when the residents of the small town began to report strange apparitions near the mansion, the mystery machine was called. "What a scary place," said Shaggy, grabbing Scooby-Doo with both hands as they looked at the enormous house with wide eyes. The dark windows of the mansion seemed to watch them, and the biting wind made a low sound, almost like a whisper. I don't know if I want to do this, Scooby. I'm great at solving mysteries, as long as they don't involve ghosts." Scooby, with wide eyes and the fur on the back of his neck standing up, just shook his head back and forth, agreeing. He didn't like the idea of being there, especially when that ghost seemed to be an invisible presence, something he might never see but would surely feel. Fred, always the determined leader, glanced at the mansion and then turned to the gang. "Don't worry, gang. Count Sinclair is just a story. And who better than us to figure out what's really going on here?" He smiled confidently, but his gaze reflected a slight unease. Even Fred knew something very strange was happening in that mansion. Daphne, with her perfectly styled hair, started walking around the house. "I'll check out what's going on around here. Maybe we can find a secret entrance or some clues before this ghost shows up." Her voice was full of excitement but also a hint of nervousness. Meanwhile, Velma, always the logical investigator of the group, already had her notebook in hand, taking notes. The legend says Count Sinclair disappeared when his fortune was stolen, but no one ever knew who did it or where he went. We'll need more information to solve the mystery. I suggest we start with the inner library, where we might find more clues about the history of this house. Shaggy, with an expression of sheer terror, held Scooby tighter. "But what if the ghost is real, Velma? What if Count Sinclair comes back and tries to make us disappear?" Scooby-Doo barked softly, almost as if agreeing. His fear was palpable, but he knew he had no choice but to follow the gang. Fred, trying to calm everyone's nerves, pointed toward the main entrance. "Let's do this together, like always. Velma and I will head to the library. Daphne, you can check the attic. Shaggy and Scooby, take care of the living room. Keep an eye out for anything unusual." Shaggy hesitated for a moment, giving one last nervous glance at the mansion before taking a step forward. "Okay, but I'm only going if Scooby comes with me. You're going to protect me, right, Scooby?" he asked, looking at the big dog, who shook his head back and forth as if saying, "This is a terrible idea." With one last look at the sinister mansion, the gang entered, the doors creaking behind them, closing off the last bit of light from the outside. The house was dark and cold, and the air felt heavier as they moved down the long corridor. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the emptiness, mingled with the creak of old wood and the soft sound of the wind through broken windows. As the gang members began their investigations in their respective locations, a strange feeling hung in the air. Shaggy and Scooby-Doo's murmurs, filled with fear, were drowned by the unease of the mansion. Something there wasn't right. And as time passed, it seemed that the house was alive, watching their every move. Suddenly, Shaggy stopped in the middle of the corridor. "Scooby, did you hear that?" The dog perked up his ears, his eyes fixed on a distant point at the end of the corridor. A dark shadow seemed to pass quickly, but when they looked, there was nothing there. Did you see that, Scooby?" Shaggy asked, swallowing hard. Scooby-Doo just looked at Shaggy with wide eyes, as if asking if he had gone crazy. The mansion seemed to have a power of its own. The dark corridor was filled with echoes, and the weak light from the gang's flashlights did little to dispel the feeling that something was watching them. The silence was broken only by Shaggy's anxious whispers and Scooby-Doo's soft barking. Every step they took echoed as if the house were swallowing their movements. There was something sinister about that mansion, something unseen but felt deep within their gut. "I don't know, Scooby, something's not right here," Shaggy murmured, clutching Scooby's collar, who, in turn, was already trembling. "What do you think about turning around and going back to the van? They can handle this without us, right?" Scooby-Doo let out a weak bark, but his gaze said it all. He also wanted to return to the safety of the van, but he knew that if the gang was there, he had to stay. Meanwhile, Fred and Velma were in the library, their eyes frantically scanning the old books and stacks of dusty papers covering the tables. Fred, always focused, pointed to a shelf full of history books, his fingers moving quickly as he searched for something relevant. "We need to find something that tells us more about the Sinclair family. Velma, have you found any clues about this count?" Fred asked, examining an old tapestry that appeared to have been forgotten for generations. Velma, while flipping through an old registry book, frowned. "It says here that Count Sinclair didn't disappear. He was declared dead after a fire at the mansion, but a person with that much power and wealth doesn't just disappear without a trace. Something doesn't add up." She lifted her eyes from the book. "It looks like he was involved in something else, something the town would rather forget." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden noise coming from somewhere ahead. It sounded like something heavy falling upstairs. Fred turned, signaling Velma with a silent gesture. "That doesn't sound like a rat, does it?" Velma shook her head. "No, that wasn't anything normal. We should investigate." As Fred and Velma made their way to the upstairs, where the noise had originated, Daphne was in the attic. She was exploring the dusty space, where boxes of keepsakes and old furniture were piled up. The atmosphere was covered by a thick layer of dust, and the wood creaked under her feet. She opened an old box and found some papers, but something made her stop. There was something strange in the corners of the room. The shadows seemed to move more frequently, as if the darkness itself had a life. "This mansion is giving me the creeps," she murmured to herself, feeling a cold presence behind her. She quickly turned around, but there was nothing there. Or rather, nothing visible. The air felt denser, and the objects around her seemed to be moving, adjusting in response to her presence. Suddenly, something glinted in the back of the room. A small metallic object was partially visible beneath a pile of old books. Daphne cautiously approached, and as she picked up the object, a strange sensation enveloped her. It was a medallion. But it wasn't just any medallion. It had the inscription, "Sinclair," engraved on its surface, with a drawing that seemed to be of a person in a portrait, with deep, empty eyes. "Daphne," called a voice from Fred, who appeared at the attic door. "What did you find?" Daphne quickly hid the medallion in her pocket, concealing it from Fred. "Nothing. Just an old piece of jewelry." She forced a smile, but her eyes said otherwise. Fred looked around, his expression serious. "There's something very wrong here. I'm sure this house has more secrets than we imagined. Velma and I found something about a fire, but we're still trying to piece it together." Meanwhile, Shaggy and Scooby-Doo were in the living room, now exploring an old fireplace. The two were so nervous that they weren't paying attention to important details. Shaggy was about to suggest they hide behind an armchair when a strange sound made them freeze. It was a soft whisper, coming from the wall beside them. "Did you hear that, Scooby?" Shaggy asked, his eyes wide. "Please tell me you heard that too." Scooby-Doo let out a quiet bark, his ears trembling as he stared at the stone wall. As he approached the wall, the sound grew louder. Suddenly, a section of the wall moved, revealing a hidden secret passage. "A secret passage? No, no. This is too much for me, Scooby. Shaggy said, stamping his feet. I just wanted a snack and a peaceful night. Not this. Scooby-Doo, however, was already sniffing the air around the secret entrance. He seemed curious and, somehow, braver. Shaggy hesitated but soon followed the dog, knowing he couldn't leave him alone. The secret passage was longer than Shaggy had imagined. The corridors were narrow, with damp stone walls and a smell of mold that seemed to seep into their bones. Scooby-Doo led the way, his paws dragging softly across the stone floor. The light from Shaggy's lantern flickered in his hands, and he could barely contain the fear that was overtaking his body. Scooby, my friend, are you starting to enjoy this whole mystery thing? Because I am not liking this one bit, not at all. Scooby-Doo looked at him with a confused gaze, as if hearing a sound that made him more curious than frightened. Shaggy, on the other hand, was anything but comfortable. Each step in the corridor seemed to echo louder, and he swore he could hear whispers coming from the walls. I don't know if this is a good idea, Scoob. What if Count Sinclair really comes back and catches us? The sound of something quickly dragging down the corridor ahead made Shaggy stop talking. Scooby-Doo fell silent, listening intently. They were in a labyrinth of corridors, and it felt as though the house itself was swallowing their movements. Whatever was ahead of them, it surely wasn't an ordinary person. Suddenly, the corridor opened into a large room, darker than the others. In the center, a large dining table was covered in dust, with melted candles still stuck to the candlesticks. Around the table, old chairs were pushed back, as if someone had just risen. The feeling of being watched was palpable. Shaggy almost screamed when a low sound, like claws scratching, cut through the silence of the room. He looked back, where a pale figure suddenly appeared in the doorway, framed by the darkness. Who are you? Shaggy stammered, his eyes wide. Scooby-Doo growled softly but didn't move, as if waiting for some reaction. The figure in the doorway began to materialize slowly, revealing a tall man with pale skin, a rigid expression, and a penetrating gaze. He was dressed in old clothes, as if from another century, and his eyes gleamed in a way that made Shaggy feel even more uncomfortable. It's me. Count Sinclair, the figure said, his voice echoing through the walls. But you, mortals, should not be here. This is a cursed place. Before Shaggy could respond, the figure vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind a burnt smell and a sound of cutting wind. Shaggy swallowed hard, fear overtaking him like a wave. This can't be real, right? That was a trick. It's impossible for a ghost to appear like that. But deep down, he knew that what he had just seen wasn't something that could be easily explained. He pulled Scooby-Doo out of the room and back down the corridor, his heart racing. I don't like this, Scoob. I really don't like it. Meanwhile, Velma and Fred were upstairs in the mansion, still trying to unravel the mysteries surrounding Count Sinclair. They had found something else. An old letter, yellowed and stained, which appeared to be correspondence from the Count himself. The words were in an elegant handwriting, but the content was clear. The Count Sinclair had tried to hide something dark, something he feared would be revealed. This is a clue, Fred said, examining the letter more carefully. He was hiding something, but what could it be? Something that could destroy the Sinclair name forever. Velma, with her sharp eye, studied the words in more detail. The letter mentions a shadow in the past, but it doesn't explain what it means. It's like he was warning someone not to go any further. Something happened here, something big and terrible. Maybe the shadow in the past is the Count's ghost himself, Fred suggested thoughtfully. But what did he hide? And why would he stay trapped here, even after his death? Before Velma could respond, a loud bang made the mansion shake. Fred and Velma looked at each other, alarmed. What was that? Fred asked, tension rising with every passing second. They hurried toward the corridor, heading toward the origin of the sound. Downstairs, Daphne was now in the room where Scooby and Shaggy had been hiding. She had heard her friend's footsteps and cautiously approached the room. When she entered, she noticed that the air felt heavier than before. The medallion she had found in the attic now seemed to glow faintly, as if calling her attention. Suddenly, a muffled scream came from somewhere distant, from deep inside the mansion. The sound froze Daphne in place. It was Shaggy's voice, no doubt. She ran toward the sound without thinking, the medallion clenched tightly in her hand. "Daphne! Daphne, where are you?" Shaggy called, his voice desperate. "I'm here," Daphne replied, finally reaching Shaggy and Scooby, who were back in the corridor, visibly shaken. "What happened?" Shaggy looked at her, his eyes filled with fear. "The Count. Count Sinclair appeared. He's here. He's real." Fear hung heavily in the air. Every step taken by the group seemed to echo with an unbearable weight, and the absolute silence of the mansion seemed to intensify the sense of imminent danger. Scooby-Doo, as always, was bristling with fear, his eyes wide, and his wavering steps betraying his lack of confidence. Beside him, Shaggy was pale, his legs trembling like bamboo stalks. "I can't take it anymore, Scoob," he whispered, his voice almost inaudible. "We need to get out of here." "I'm not leaving you alone, Shaggy," Daphne replied, trying to offer him some comfort as she firmly gripped the medallion she had found. The jewel seemed to glow faintly, almost as if responding to the rising tension in the air. Fred, for his part, remained silent, focused. He knew there was something much larger happening here, something that neither they nor the mansion were willing to reveal easily. Velma, who had wandered off to investigate the upper floor, suddenly appeared around the corner of the hallway. Her eyes were fixed on an old painting hanging on the wall, and her brows were furrowed with a clear indication that she had discovered something important. "Guys, look at this," she called out, her voice deep and serious. The group gathered around Velma, who was pointing at the painting. It depicted Count Sinclair, but in a way that confused them. The man in the picture didn't seem like just any aristocrat, he had a sinister expression, penetrating eyes, and an almost supernatural aura. "He doesn't look human," Daphne murmured, her voice low. Velma nodded. "Exactly. It's not normal for a painting to have this kind of presence. Look at the background of the image. Here, right beside the Count, there's a shadowy figure. It could be a symbolic representation, or perhaps, what we're dealing with." Fred leaned in closer, and suddenly, something caught his attention. "This detail. I've seen it before. It's in the letter we found. The shadow is mentioned here, almost as if it were a symbol of what the Count feared. Something he didn't want anyone to know. What did he want to hide?" As Fred and Velma discussed the meaning of the painting, the air around them began to grow thicker, heavier. The mansion seemed alive, as if reacting to their presence. Suddenly, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed from somewhere behind them. Shaggy swallowed hard. "No. Not again. It can't be him." The group turned abruptly. A familiar but strangely distorted figure appeared in the shadows of the hallway. Count Sinclair was before them again, but his presence seemed different. He was no longer wearing the elegant clothes from the painting but instead a black cloak that seemed to absorb the light around him. His eyes were filled with a supernatural intensity, and his smile looked more like a threat than a greeting. "You should not be here. You should not have come this far," the Count said in a low, almost whispering voice, yet laden with terrible force. "This place is cursed, and all who try to uncover its secrets, pay the price." Velma, still calm, stepped forward. "What are you hiding? What was Count Sinclair so afraid of?" The Count looked at her, and for a moment, something in his eyes seemed to give, as though he were preparing to reveal something that had been kept hidden for a long time. "You want to know what happened to Count Sinclair, my dear?" He paused dramatically. "Very well. You will have what you deserve. But the truth, the real truth, is something you will never forget. Suddenly, the surroundings began to warp. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the shadows stretched out in a terrifying manner. The candles around the room began to light themselves, casting flickering lights on the walls. What started as a simple investigation now seemed to have transformed into something much more sinister. Fred pulled everyone back, trying to retreat into the hallway. "Let's go. We need to get out of here, now." But Count Sinclair was ahead of them, blocking the way. His form seemed to be becoming more misty, more ethereal, as though he were dematerializing before their eyes. "You don't understand. I was deceived. I was betrayed. And now, I am the soul trapped in this place. There's no escape for you." At that moment, a secret door behind Count Sinclair opened, revealing a staircase that descended into the darkness. Velma watched closely. "I think this staircase will lead us to the truth, to the heart of the mansion, where Count Sinclair's secret lies." Daphne gripped the medallion even tighter, as if feeling that it was the key to everything. "Let's go. We can't leave without knowing what's going on here." Fred let out a heavy sigh. "It's now or never. Follow me." The group, now more united than ever, descended the dark staircase. Each step seemed deeper, more threatening, and the feeling that something was watching them intensified. When they reached the bottom, what they saw was even more unsettling, an underground room, filled with old books and broken objects, with an altar in the center. On the altar, something was hidden. An ancient box, locked, with strange symbols engraved on it. Count Sinclair's secret was there, waiting to be revealed. The air in the subterranean room was heavy, dense, as if the mansion itself were holding its breath. The shadow that approached the altar seemed to grow as it drew nearer, taking on an indistinct and menacing form. Its outlines were hard to distinguish, but there was something undeniably malevolent in its presence. It was as though a veil of darkness enveloped it completely, turning it into a creature that defied human comprehension. Shaggy, his eyes wide with terror, grabbed Scooby-Doo, who was also shaking, his fur bristling. "This can't be possible, right, Scoob? This isn't happening, is it?" Shaggy's voice, usually full of enthusiasm, was now unrecognizable, muffled by fear. Scooby-Doo let out a low bark, as if trying to protest, but upon looking at the shadow, he became even more frightened. It was as though his survival instinct had been triggered in the most primal way. The creature approaching them was not an ordinary ghost, but something far older, something that transcended the dimensions of fear. Fred, for his part, stood firm, but his gaze was tense. He knew there was no turning back now. They had come too far, and they needed to understand what was at stake. "Everyone, stay together. We cannot separate now, no matter what happens," he said, with the natural authority of a leader, but with a hint of unease in his tone. Velma, with her head bent forward, was studying the box on the altar. She felt that the key to unraveling this entire mystery was there. "I don't know what it is, but something tells me we need to open this box." Count Sinclair, he had something much darker in mind than just being a ghost. He was trying to hide something. Daphne, still holding the medallion tightly in her hands, cautiously approached the altar. The glow of the medallion seemed to intensify as she neared the box. "I think this medallion is linked to all of this. Maybe it's what we need to open the box." The shadow, now closer, emitted a guttural sound, almost as if it were laughing, a sound that reverberated through the walls of the room. The feeling of menace became palpable. Yet, no one moved. They knew that the only way out was to confront it. Whatever was watching them needed to be faced. Velma stepped forward. "Daphne, try using the medallion. It must have some kind of power." With a tremor in her hands, Daphne placed the medallion on the box, exactly where there was a small indentation. The reaction was immediate. The box began to glow with an intense golden light, as though it had been awakened by something deeper than just the presence of the medallion. The shadow, which had been writhing before, stopped. The guttural sound ceased abruptly. The room fell into an absolute silence, except for the sound of the box slowly opening. Inside, there was an ancient scroll, rolled up, sealed with a golden clasp. Velma, without hesitation, took the scroll and unfurled it. The words written on it were old and hard to decipher, but she managed to read what seemed to be a cryptic message. The soul of Count Sinclair was captured by an ancient pact. Not just his life, but his essence was taken by a force beyond death. Only those who break the cycle of the pact can free him or condemn him forever. Daphne looked at the others, stunned. So, he wasn't just a ghost. He made a pact with something far more powerful than we imagined. At that moment, the shadow manifested physically, and what had once seemed like an ethereal presence now took on a more tangible form, a black figure floating in the air, with eyes glowing a deep red. Count Sinclair, or what remained of him, was finally revealed. "I am the force that consumed Count Sinclair, and now I am more than he ever was," said the figure in a voice that echoed like thunder. "You think you can stop me? You think you can destroy the pact that gave me eternal power?" Fred raised his gaze, now more determined than ever. "No. We're not going to let you continue haunting this mansion. Count Sinclair may have made a mistake, but you won't use it to perpetuate yourself." The shadow let out a demonic laugh, and suddenly, the room seemed to be swallowed by a wave of darkness. The candles extinguished instantly, and everything around them seemed to distort. "You still don't understand. There's no breaking the cycle. Now that my power has been released, it will never be contained again." Velma clenched the scroll in her hands. "It's not possible. The pact is written here. It has a flaw. We just need to find that flaw." As the others tried to hold their ground against the shadow that seemed to be growing, Velma looked more closely at the scroll. There, in the fine print, something stood out, a mention of a lost relic, an item that could reverse Count Sinclair's pact. "I know what we need to do," Velma exclaimed, her eyes gleaming. "There's a relic hidden in the mansion that can undo the pact. We need to find it before it's too late." But before she could reveal more, the shadow lunged toward them, and the ground beneath their feet began to give way. The battle to save the mansion and solve the mystery was just beginning, and they had no idea how great the force they were fighting truly was. With the shadow of Count Sinclair finally gone and the mansion restored to its former tranquility, the Mystery Machine gang left the place with a mix of relief and satisfaction. The mystery had been solved, but what remained was the certainty that, no matter how terrifying the enigmas, nothing could stop their unity and courage. Throughout this journey, they had not only faced the horrors of a haunted mansion but also reaffirmed the bond that made them unbeatable. As the dawn poured over the horizon, Scooby-Doo and Shaggy were already immersed in their playful antics, relieved and happy. And although the mystery was over, the gang's adventure would never end. After all, as long as there were enigmas to solve, the Mystery Machine would always be ready for the next great discovery. The mansion, now free from its curse, would remain a silent reminder of the friends' courage and determination. But for the gang, there were no more ghosts to fear, only new mysteries to unmask. And with that, the story of Scooby-Doo and his friends came to a close for now, leaving in the air the eternal question, what will come next?